Today, we're diving into a huge shift that's happening right inside Canada's justice system. We're talking about sentencing, the final step in a criminal trial, and it's being completely rethought, rebuilt from the ground up. So let's get into how, and more importantly, why this is all happening.
And really, it all boils down to this one question. What are we actually trying to do when a court hands down a sentence? Is the main goal to punish someone for what they did? Or is it about trying to heal the harm that was caused? This is the fundamental tension that's driving this entire conversation. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the basic principles of sentencing. Then, the standard tools a judge has. After that, we'll get into the crisis that really forced the system to take a hard look at itself, the new solutions that came from that, and finally, the incredible rise of Indigenous-led justice.
All right, first up, the balancing act. Because before we can really understand where the system is headed, we have to get a handle on the core ideas it was built on in the first place.
Okay, so this right here, this is the big one. The single most important rule in all of Canadian sentencing, proportionality. It basically means the punishment has to fit the crime and it has to fit the person who committed it. It sounds pretty straightforward, but making that call is incredibly complex.
And you can really see just how complex it gets when you look at all of these competing goals. A judge has to try and balance all of them. On one hand, you've got things like denouncing the crime and keeping offenders away from society. But on the other hand, you have goals like rehabilitation and repairing the harm done to victims in the community. These things often pull in totally opposite directions, which makes a judge's decision a really, really tough balancing act.
So, with that tricky balancing act in mind, what tools does a judge actually have to work with? Let's take a look at the standard toolkit.
We often jump right to thinking about prison, but the standard toolkit is actually way broader than that. A judge can use diversion to get people into treatment programs instead of jail, or probation to keep them supervised in the community. There are even conditional sentences, which are basically like serving your sentence under house arrest. So the system has known for a long time that just locking people up isn't always the right answer.
But what happens when, despite all these principles and all these tools, the results show that the system is failing badly? This is where our story really takes a turn.
Just look at that number, 32%. This is what changed everything. It's the percentage of Indigenous people in Canada's federal prisons. A number so shocking, so out of proportion, that it exposed a crisis of over-incarceration that could not be ignored anymore. It forced the entire justice system to confront its own fundamental breakdown.
And this chart, wow, it just lays it all out, doesn't it? Look at the incredible gap between those two bars. This isn't just a small problem. This is a massive, systemic failure that absolutely demanded a systemic response.
And that response started right here with something called the Gladue Report. The Supreme Court of Canada stepped in and mandated this report. It forces judges to stop and consider the unique context of an Indigenous person's life, things like the history of colonialism, the trauma of residential schools. It's a tool designed to bring that crucial context back into the courtroom.
And it doesn't stop there. Using that same logic, courts are now starting to use what are called Impact of Race and Culture Assessments, or IRCAs. These do something very similar for Black offenders, making sure the court understands the deep, systemic impact that anti-Black racism has on a person's life and their experiences with the justice system.
So all of this new awareness, it didn't just lead to new reports. It sparked a real wave of innovation. The system started to build entirely new kinds of courts with totally new approaches.
And you can find the whole philosophy behind this shift right in that landmark Gladue decision. The Supreme Court itself pointed towards a different way of thinking, called restorative justice. The idea here isn't just to punish, it's to restore the harmony that was broken and actually fix the harm that was done.
And this table really breaks down just how different these two ways of thinking are. Traditional punitive justice asks what law was broken. Its focus is punishment. But restorative justice asks a totally different question. Who was harmed? And its focus on healing, repair, and getting the whole community involved to try and restore relationships. It's a massive shift.
And what came out of this? A whole new generation of specialized courts. We're seeing Gladue courts specifically for Indigenous offenders, mental health and drug treatment courts that try to tackle the root causes of crime, and even specialized domestic violence courts. Every single one is designed not just to process a case, but to try and solve the underlying problems that led to the crime in the first place.
Which brings us to our final stop on this journey. And honestly, it might be the most transformative piece of the puzzle. It's this move away from just fixing the Canadian system to empowering Indigenous communities to lead and build their own. I mean, just take a look at this. From the Tsuut'ina First Nation Court out in Alberta to the Mi'kmaq Legal Support Network in Nova Scotia, Indigenous justice centers are popping up all across the country. This isn't just one or two isolated experiments anymore. It's a full-blown national movement.
But here's the really crucial part. This isn't just about offering better, more culturally appropriate legal services. It's about something much, much bigger. It's about recognizing that there can be more than one legal system. The key idea here is something called legal pluralism.
And this is the absolute key to understanding what's happening. These centers aren't just helping people navigate Canadian law. They are actively bringing back and applying Indigenous legal orders, their own unique systems of law and justice that have existed on this land for thousands of years. It's truly about rebuilding justice from within the community itself.
And so, all of this leaves us with a really big question for the future. As Canada keeps going down this path, is the end goal to create one perfect, single justice system for everyone? Or is the future about recognizing, respecting, and empowering many different legal traditions to deliver justice for their own people in their own way?